Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. This is Jamie.
This is Erin.
First, I want to say thank you to those who have left reviews on Apple Podcasts.
Well, we love to see it.
Yeah, we love to hear feedback from our listeners so we don't feel like we're just talking to the void, or I guess with each other.
What void?
I had enough of that during distance learning, all the black boxes. In particular, I will shout out the You're at the Brunch review. That killed us. Gosh. I just love that.
We had a good laugh about that. So thank you. Thank you. We've gotten to recent ones. So please, if you haven't reviewed, please do so. Again, it makes us this happy.
I know. That's the vibe we're going for. So I almost want to change the title as opposed to our bad one to like, You're at the Brunch. It's like our subtitle.
I wish we did it at brunch. Meanwhile, it's usually 9 p.m.
Yeah, after the kids are asleep. And unfortunately, like work tomorrow. Brunch would be much better vibes.
Yeah. Maybe at some point we'll have to
one too many mimosas, as the other review said.
Yeah, maybe at one point we'll actually have to do brunch and just do it for the sake of the reviews. Make it more accurate.
I know. Or just do a brunch version.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying the content as well, we'd love if you could also leave a rating and a review. Again, those can be short. Doesn't have to be anything long. Love to just hear any feedback. So wherever you listen to podcasts, if you could do that, that would be amazing. It would really mean a lot to us.
Yeah, and it does help people find the podcast. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah. And as we approach October, I had mentioned before we're going to do a Patreon special. And I actually updated it, or I decided, I didn't ask Erin, but I decided to update to make it even better. For October, we'll tell you more, obviously, as we get there. You'll be able to subscribe for free for the month of October to Patreon. We are trying to get better as well and pump up our Patreon content. And we thought this would be a good way to introduce you all to our Patreon content and have us be more creative around our Patreon content. Yeah, so that's exciting.
Yeah, I think that'll be a good gift to you guys for October.
Yeah, celebrate our birthday.
Yes. And stick around at the end of this episode. You'll get to hear a trailer for another history podcast that we've been enjoying. We love being part of the history podcast community. It's been fun to make some of those relationships and share some of the podcasts that we're listening to. So stick around, please, to listen to that.
Yeah, definitely. It's fun to be able to connect with other history podcasts, especially ones that are, again, not always in that traditional vein. So that's definitely been something fun as we've been continuing our little journey here. So speaking of Patreon, as I had a moment ago, today's topic, P.T. Barnum, it was actually a Patreon poll's choice for my topic a few weeks ago when I was stuck and I couldn't think of a topic. One part of Patreon is we do, at least monthly, we'll throw up a poll for our next figure. So you get a little more say in, again, who you're choosing next.
That's always a bonus, especially if you have your heart set on us covering somebody.
Yes, definitely. Because, even actually with the poll, I believe if I hadn't done it that time, I know there's usually the option for other and you can comment. So you can always throw somebody else into the mix. So for P.T. Barnum, what's interesting to me is that he's kind of come back into the spotlight as like a historical figure with that 2017's The Greatest Showman. Did you ever watch it?
No,
I didn't.
I've seen clips.
Me too.
And I know the music's been all over, so I'm aware of its influence and that people love it. But no, I haven't seen it myself.
Right. And P.T. Barnum, of course, is played by Hugh Jackman, which is very generous casting.
Yeah,
When we post a picture of P.T. Barnum.
I just feel like when Hugh Jackman's playing you and Zendaya's in the mix, I'm assuming we're getting a heavily sanitized fictional version of P.T. Barnum. So
yes,
at least I'm just gonna guess.
Right. From what I've seen and I've read about it, I haven't seen it, but while he isn't seen as like a puritanical hero by any means in the film, he certainly has this rags to riches story and a redemption arc in the film. It seems like his worst attributes in the film seem to be distancing himself from his circus family as he gains favor with aristocrats and he spends time away from his family. Which, if you think that's it, oh boy, are you in for a ride.
PT wishes that's all that we could judge him for. But sorry, PT. I don't know a ton about him, but I know enough to say that he's going to get some judgment here, some side eye.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah, a whole lot of side eye. The whole thing makes it funnier, and I'm going to have to keep bringing up Hugh Jackman, because just imagining Hugh Jackman, if they did the realistic version of P.T. Barnum's life, imagining him doing some of these things is so anti-Hugh Jackman that it's actually hilarious. But let's start from the beginning. So P.T. Barnum, he was born Phineas Taylor Barnum on July 5th, our dad's birthday. But this one's in 1810.
Dad was not born in 1810. We're all old, but not that old.
Right. And I don't know if he wants to share necessarily a birthday with P.T. Barnum.
No.
And he was born in Bethel, Connecticut, into a family pretty much not necessarily rags when you're talking about a rags to riches story, but certainly modest means. According to ConnecticutHistory.org, his father was, get this resume, a farmer, a tailor, a tavern keeper, and a grocer.
He's doing it all.
Yeah.
Who says you can't have it all?
Yeah. If that didn't keep his dad busy enough, he had 10 kids by 2 wives.
Oh, no.
Separate times, to be clear. No polygamy in this story.
Okay.
P.T. was his 6th child and his first by his second wife, Irene. So he's the oldest
of the second
family. Of the second family, yeah. So unsurprisingly for the time period, Bethel, where P.T. grew up, was a pretty conservative town. We're talking about the early 1800s, right? 1820s. So conservative as in life revolving around the church.
Yeah, isn't there like a great revival, evangelical revival around that time? So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, what is it? Is it the Second Great Awakening?
I think so. Or it could be the first. I don't know.
Second Great Awakening. It took place till about 1835. So that's totally in this vein.
Matthew, my husband, see, I do know American history.
Yeah.
He's going to be so proud.
Maybe you'll get a pat on the back or a high five. Good job, champ.
Gold star.
Mm-hmm. Good job, champ. So it's not going to be the most fun time to grow up for anyone, particular PT. But he also kind of wasn't alone in that. In fact, his maternal grandfather, who it seems like he definitely took after, he was also named Phineas. He pushed the boundaries at the time with practical jokes. So later, Barnum recalled that his grandfather, quote, would go farther, wait longer, work harder, and contrive deeper to carry out a practical joke than for anything else under heaven.
That's kind of adorable. I like that. Especially, we've talked about before, kind of fleshing out these people from history. You usually don't see that kind of joy, that kind of fun at this point in time. So I do love that little detail.
Especially between like kids and their grandparents. Like this time was not a very, huggy, feely.
Yeah, I feel like kids were to be seen, not heard.
Exactly. His grandfather's big personality and his propensity for, quote, harmless and amusing deception, end quote, clearly impacted PT, and it would definitely impact his life's trajectory in the entertainment business. That idea of harmless,
Questionable.
it's questionable, but what he views as harmless, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So as a child, PT was described as a strong student who did very well in math, particularly, and who hated physical labor, which understandable.
Yeah. Me too.
As a kid, because like many kids at the time, of course, he's working on his family farm and later at their general store because child laws, who is she?
Yeah, child labor laws ain't a thing at this point.
Yeah, although it does remind me of, so we have a cabin in Wisconsin, and ever since we were a kid, we go to this local bowling alley / restaurant, and the kid whose parents own the place would be serving our parents beer and stuff at what? She was probably felt like 10 or 12.
Yeah, very young.
She's still there, yeah. So in some places that hasn't changed, but also side note, the local restaurant / bowling alley happens to be in the town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, which is the home of Ed Gein, who won't be showing up on our show as a subject, but want to do that little shout out for true crime lovers out there.
Hey, maybe we could find something nice about Ed Gein and something that cancels out, the killing and the wearing of skins aspect.
Nipple belts and such. Well, to speak of generous casting, you found that.
Oh yeah, that Charlie Hunnam, I think is his name. They just announced that they're going to do an Ed Gein series. That Ryan Murphy, I think it's Monster series. Yeah, they're going to do an Ed Gein, and very, very generous casting.
Yeah, what's up with this generous casting of these guys?
Especially like him. He's a monster. It's like, get the ugliest man that you can find.
Right. Seriously. Anyway. Moving on from Ed Gein.
And nipple belts.
And nipple belts. Even as a young kid, PT was seen as a natural salesman. So at 12 years old, he was, the article said, peddling snacks and cherry rum to soldiers. True entrepreneurial spirit right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, making the money.
Lots of side hustles.
Wait till you hear actually a lot of his side hustles. So when he was only 15, his father died. And so as the oldest son from his father's second wife, it was up to him to support his mother and siblings. Of course, this is going to be very typical of the time, but that doesn't mean it was easy. He worked a variety of odd jobs until he found steady work as the publisher of a weekly newspaper in Danbury, Connecticut, called the Herald of Freedom. And this is where we start to see that deceptive side of PT pop up. He was arrested 3 times for libel.
Oh, damn. That's 3 times is a lot. You would think that after the first time he'd think again, but all right, PT.
Yeah.
Did it say who he was libeling?
No. I know I should go dive deeper into that, but I'd be curious. I'm obviously, if he's arrested for it, must be somebody who had enough power.
That's what I was wondering. But 3 times, oh man.
At 19, he gets married to a 21-year-old woman named Charity. He'll eventually have 4 children by her. And 5 years later, they moved to New York City. So a big lifestyle change. And this is where he's going to begin his career as a showman. But first, he's going to try other ventures. He runs a boarding house and a grocery store. But ultimately, quote, he was trying to find a venture that would pay him the money he felt he deserved.
Aren't we all?
I know.
So he really had a high opinion of himself then?
We'll hear that later. That's what some of his friends said. Yes.
Like, why do you deserve a lot of money, but other people don't?
So he wrote an autobiography in 1855. And he said in that, quote, I had long fancied that I could succeed if I could only get a hold of a public exhibition. So he wrote that in his The Life of P.T. Barnum, written by himself. We'll talk about that later because that one gets quite a few edits as well.
Oh, I bet.
From himself, though, too.
Hey, sometimes it's necessary. I think I would do that too if I wrote an autobiography.
I know. I'd be like, oh,
Scratch that.
scratch that. We'll do another rewrite. Okay. So you might want to take a deep breath here because it's going to get ugly here really fast as Barnum enters the entertainment biz. Like, there's no easing in to it. This, if anything, is probably going to be something that's, no, for sure is going to come back up in the judgment piece.
Okay.
But first I want to talk about this word because humbug, which, of course,
bah humbug.
I know, all I can think of is Michael Caine as Scrooge from the Muppets Christmas Carol, but P.T. Barnum's life in a Muppet form would be horrifying.
Yeah, I reserve the right to rethink it, but at the moment, I don't think he deserves a Muppet adaptation, but we'll see. We'll see about that.
No.
And yes, I'm the arbiter of Muppets.
Muppets, yeah, you decide what can and can't be made with Muppets. Later, he's going to write a book in 1865 called Humbugs of the World. So humbug, I'll quote from one of the Smithsonian articles I read. I love the name of the article. The article is called P.T. Barnum Isn't the Hero the Greatest Showman Wants You to Think.
Mm-hmm. You don't say.
Quote, the term humbug consists in putting on glittering appearances, outside show, novel expedients by which to suddenly arrest public attention and attract the public eye and ear, end quote. And Barnum really wanted to make it clear that doing that was justifiable. So, quote, he said, there are various trades and occupations which need only notoriety to ensure success, he claimed. So basically, he concluded no harm, no foul, as long as at the end of the day, the customers felt that they got their money's worth.
Yeah, that sounds like some justification to me.
Mm-hmm. So you can swindle and do what you want, but as long as the public are happy about it.
That sounds like some good old excuses right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so back to his ugly start in show business.
Oh no, I'm scared.
So he, quote unquote, rents. Okay, actually, I should clarify. First, let me say, at this time, so mid 1830s, slavery is still legal in the United States, though it's not legal in New York. But he found a loophole in this law. So keep that in mind.
No, not a loophole.
So he, quote unquote, rents a Black woman named Joyce Heth from an acquaintance, and he tours with her under the pretense that she was a 161-year-old former nurse of George Washington.
I'm going to guess that she's not.
Unsurprisingly, yeah. This is later going to be found out to be a hoax after her death. Shocking, I know. I'm unfortunately, though, going to have to come back to her death in a bit because unfortunately her death is going to come into this.
Oh, no.
So can you imagine Hugh Jackman doing that during the film?
Just renting a human? No, yeah. I cannot. That's all kinds of grossness. Yeah. Renting a human for your own monetary gain. I'm assuming she's not earning much, if anything, or at least pennies compared to what he's getting.
No. I like the Smithsonian article actually takes a jab at the Hugh Jackman thing, writing, quote, Jackman's Barnum would never be a person comfortable purchasing an enslaved woman to turn a tidy profit. I like they say the song, rewrite the stars, indeed, to quote a song from the new movie.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's hilarious. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hate it. I think I could speak for everybody and say we hate it.
Yeah, so Benjamin Reese, he's the author of a biography on P.T. Barnum. I didn't read the biography, but it was quoted quite a few times in the Smithsonian article. That book's called The Showman and the Slave, if you're interested in reading it. He writes that, quote, the story of his life that we choose to tell is in part the story that we choose to tell about American culture. We can choose to erase things or dance around touchy subjects and present a kind of feel-good story, or we can use it as an opportunity to look at very complex and troubling histories that our culture has been grappling with for centuries. End quote.
Yeah.
Well, we know which category Barnum's story falls into right now when it comes to popular culture.
Yeah. I mean, uncomfortable is an understatement.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
again, it's easier to omit the less than savory elements and focus on rags to riches, the glamour of circus life.
Right. So, to place this quote touring spectacle in context, when he's taking Joyce Heth around, curiosities and quote freaks of nature, end quote, not my quote, but again, that's a term that was used at that time. They were hugely popular in the late 18th century and early 19th century. But actually, by the time Barnum's touring in the 1830s, it's becoming more of a lowbrow type of entertainment. Maybe like really trashy reality TV of the day, but not even like Real Housewives, but like Love After Lockup. Yeah.
You know your reality shows better than
I
me,
do.
so you can compare to what
I went through a Love After Lockup time.
I don't know what that is, and I don't want to.
You probably don't know. So Reese writes, again, the author of that book, he writes that, quote, by the 1830s, the display of grotesquely embodied human forms was for some populace carnivalesque entertainment and for others an offense to genteel sensibilities.
Yeah.
An offense to it.
They're at least starting to, in the public consciousness, not everybody is sold on just going to a carnival, a circus, and seeing people with different disabilities, different looks.
There's starting to be that pushback or that, oh, it's not appropriate. Or
yeah, it's trashy. It leaves that sour taste in your mouth.
That lowbrow, like easy entertainment. But we'll also talk about that it was cheap entertainment.
That's what I can imagine is what keeps it going longer than it should have, is just the cost being of quote unquote freak shows. There is another podcast, After Dark, they covered the Elephant Man. I can't remember if he's involved with P.T. Barnum, but eventually that's the only way he can work is in these kinds of shows, sadly.
Yeah, and that's the hard part is a lot of these people, like, they didn't really have any other options. Like, this was way to make money and have a living. That's definitely the tragic part about it and being exploited by people like Barnum.
You can't talk about it without talking about the exploitation piece.
So, going back to Heth, there's questions about whether Barnum believed the story about her or not, although it really ultimately doesn't matter. So, going back, the grossest thing is it's going to get worse.
Oh, no. How?
I know.
How is that even possible?
So, the grossest thing to me is that even in death, Barnum used her to make an extra $1. The Smithsonian article notes, quote, when she died in February 1836, Barnum had one more act up his sleeve. He drummed up a final public spectacle, hosting a live autopsy in a New York saloon. There, 1,500 spectators paid 50 cents to see the dead woman cut up, quote, revealing that she was likely half her purported age, end quote.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's...
Do we need to even go on?
No, I'm kind of speechless. The fact that it's like exploitation and so many different layers.
And life and in death. I know. When I was researching this, I'm like, I don't know. Like, you might even need to tell any more of his story. Is there going to be anything that's going to redeem that? But
yeah, that's kind of it for me. I don't know. I don't know if you come back from that. I'm willing to keep an open mind, I guess. But the fact that he's selling money to see somebody on a table, their autopsy, them at their most vulnerable, arguably.
Right.
Yeah, surprisingly, I don't like it.
Yeah. It's like, okay, now, I used you in life and that one last bit of exploitation is just,
Yeah, that you can't even let her go in peace.
it's really gut punching. It reminds me in some ways of the Bonnie and Clyde with the
Mm-hmm.
hysteria and the people that how they let people see their bodies.
I
And
was thinking of that too. We talked about in that episode how it's the worst of the worst, and even people who like Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, where they're not necessarily the greatest human beings, but still, at least in death, you expect some dignity.
yeah, it's very ugly. And in this case, it's literally a show to be put on, right? People
Hmm.
paying money to see her get cut up.
Yeah.
Barnum continues with some touring with various acts until 1841 when he outbids others. So he becomes the owner of the American Museum in New York City. This is actually going to be a big part of his life. A lot of times, again, when we hear his name, we think the circus, but
Yeah.
that's not going to come up actually till he's 60 years old.
Oh,
He,
wow.
yeah. So more part of his life is that touring, but more beyond touring is this American Museum. When he bought it, it was a pretty generic museum at the time. Typical like taxidermied animals, waxworks, pretty much run of the mill museum stuff for that time. Of course, that's not going to quite jive with Barnum's sensibilities, right?
Somebody's going to jazz it up.
Yeah, that's not going to make him the money and fame he thinks he deserves, right?
Hmm.
Of course, he's going to lean into the sensational or, quote, interesting curiosities, end quote. So some of his most famous, I'm just going to call them curiosities to use a term, but again, a lot of these are people, were, quote, the Fiji mermaid, which was later found to be a preserved monkey head on top of a preserved fish scale. Chang and Eng, who were Siamese twins, again, exploiting people with real conditions.
Yeah. So are they, I'm assuming they're alive. They're alive there.
Yeah, they
Okay.
are. Probably his most famous, quote unquote, curiosity is a man nicknamed General Tom Thumb, who was only 25 inches tall. Visitors could tour the museum for 25 cents. And at one point, they said it had 850,000 curiosities on display.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah. And it attracted about 4,000 people a day.
Crazy.
I know. Between actually 1842 and when it finally closed, it gets burned down twice. Finally gets burnt down for the last time in 1868, and he doesn't rebuild it. The museum attracted over 82 million people, including some famous visitors such as Charles Dickens and Edward VII, who was the Prince of Wales.
I'm not surprised on Dickens.
No. Although there's another connection to Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dickens in real life was
Not
kind of
Gonzo. Yeah,
I was
not Gonzo. Not the Gonzo.
No. Gonzo would never. Dickens in real life was kind of a dick.
I think he's on our list.
Yeah, he had this secret second family.
Yeah, always questionable for that. So Barnum took Tom Thumb actually to showcase to Abraham Lincoln.
Ooh.
I guess if you're trying to, again, find positive attributes, his museum, which was open during the Civil War, it provided a distraction for people during the wartime. And
we could be distracted by things that aren't exploiting others, but I'll give it to you.
And his museum actually included at that time a lot of pro-Union exhibits, lectures, and drama. It's going to be a Confederate sympathizer who's going to burn it to the ground for the first time in 1865.
Oh, wow.
Because of all that. And he takes Tom Thumb even abroad on tour and performs in front of Queen Victoria. So Tom Thumb ends up being Barnum's most profitable exhibit. So any of this changing your viewpoint of Barnum?
No, I'm still not loving him. I know that he's not the only person who's peddling in this kind of exploitation. Again, these shows were literally a dime a dozen, whether it's in the United States and in the UK. very popular at that time, but we're not judging anybody else. We're judging him.
Right. Okay, and another maybe positive thing. The museum includes America's first aquarium.
Oh, cool.
Okay. So I'll give Barnum that in the plus category.
Hey, your daughter loves sea animals.
True.
All right, we could stop it here.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
100% good. He did the aquarium. Although I guess a lot of people would also
Say
exploitation in terms of like aquarium zoos. So
yeah. And I'm sure these early aquariums were probably not the most animal friendly.
yeah, I'm going to say no.
Let me add on to other famous exhibits, especially as we talk about race. Let me direct quote again from that Smithsonian article because there's really nothing else I can say that's better. They said, quote, most uncomfortably in the museum, Barnum continued to present, quote, freakishness, end quote, in the form of, quote, living curiosities. One of the most popular displays featured a man billed as, quote, a creature found in the wilds of Africa, supposed to be a mixture of the wild native African and the orange orangutan, a kind of man monkey. The offensive poster concluded, for want of a positive name, the creature was called, what is it? End quote.
I'm going to guess it's not a creature.
No. So not a creature, but an African-American man named William Henry Johnson, who had actually been a cook for another showman in Connecticut.
God damn it, PT.
I know. But the racist exhibits don't end there. You also have the Aztec children, who are actually just children from El Salvador.
I mean, at this point, do I love children in it? No, but
you're like, okay, they're just called Aztec children. Could be worse.
Yeah, could be worse. I was expecting worse.
And of course, like I had mentioned earlier, the real, I just mean had actual physical differences. In this case, the exoticized Siamese twins, Chang and Eng, as I mentioned earlier. So in the 1850s, bad investments actually caused Barnum to go bankrupt. I'm not going to go too much into his investing and money pieces.
I want to hear all his investments. Tell me.
But many people rejoiced in the public humiliation of him, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said that Barnum's downfall showed, quote, the gods visible again.
Oh my God. Cruel, but fair.
I know. I kind of wanted to high five that.
Yeah.
I'm going to high five him from the sky. Barnum actually lost his museum for a bit, but he was actually able to emerge and rebuy it. And one big reason how he rebuilt was get this, he went on tour as a temperance speaker. And he also toured again with Tom Thumb.
Does he actually believe in the temperance movement, or is he just using this to get money again?
We'll come back to that because shockingly, also, he's going to get into politics. I know. He does like a fraud who gets into politics. I know. Never happens. We'll talk about that and his beliefs there. And so I'll tie temperance into that. But the height of his fame, Barnum is just as well as known as his, quote, curiosities. Like his face and image is well known among the public. He's described as having a large 6'2" frame, a, quote, bulbous nose and pot belly, end quote. I had to throw that in.
Yeah, I've seen pictures. We have pictures up on Instagram to promote the episode. So checks out.
With all the shit he did, I got to throw in the bulbous nose and pot belly. He nicknamed himself the Prince of Humbugs. With the wealth he accumulated, he lived on a giant 17-acre plot in Connecticut in this huge 3-story mansion. As we're talking about more connections to famous individuals, Mark Twain visited him there, as well as abolitionist Horace Greeley, which really surprised me.
Horace, no.
Yeah, journalist.
More from you.
Yeah. They visited. Yeah. Twain, that tracks. But Greeley, that was surprising to me. So his close friends said he was thoughtful and kind, but they also noted he was very stingy with his money and really surprising, egotistical. had a
Yeah.
big head.
Not shocking there. That's the problem is I know that these people who are making him money, the reason that people aren't coming there to see P.T. Barnum, even if he's got that celebrity at some point, but you know he's not paying them a good wage, a living wage.
No, not at all. I think that's the hard part, right? Because it's not like he's going to pay them that much, because then he also would lose them as like, there's that piece of also this almost indentured servitude in a way.
Good comparison. Not that it would excuse what he's done so far if he was paying them great, but at least that would be a step towards some sort of recognition that in their way they are putting their bodies on the line. They are contributing.
So Barnum, as I said, goes into politics in the 1860s. Almost reminds me of another fraud who enters the political ring after the entertainment business. He successfully runs and serves 2 terms in the Connecticut state legislature, as well as he serves as the mayor of Bridgeport. So one of the most surprising things about this, I would say, are some of the issues he fought for and stood for. The major issues at the forefront of his political career, he fought against prostitution, and he fought union discrimination against African Americans.
Oh, wow.
I was like,
again,
come again?
That doesn't sound like the PT we know, but all right. Those are good things. I'm surprised, but at least those are good things to advocate for.
Right. From the Smithsonian article, quote, Barnum began to express a novel sympathy and regret about the subjugation of African Americans, or at least to approach civil rights matters at the end of the Civil War with a new, somewhat softer vision of racial paternalism, end quote. So also not crazy for the time. There's still this much held belief that even by people who fought to end slavery, there was still obviously this idea that with race, there was like this, again, that paternalism of like, oh, we need to take care of,
protect them.
These poor Black people. So he's just racist in a different way,
Yeah.
I mean, more common for that time period.
In a less cruel way, I guess.
Right.
If you want to give it to him.
Yeah, it's hard to give him credit for this. And I think a big thing to keep in mind is, remember, Barnum is a big talker, so it's really hard to know what to believe. Like, is this just talk to get elected?
Did he actually do anything, or is this just all talk?
I actually want to quote a somewhat large passage from the Smithsonian article, but I think it really states these things so perfectly about that idea of like, what did he believe? So, quote, with Barnum, you never know if that's part of the act or the contrition was genuine. That comes from Reese's book. People change, and it's possible he really did feel this, although throughout his career as a showman, there are many episodes of exhibiting non-white people in degrading ways. With Heth, at least, as Reese says, he clearly viewed her as an opportunity and a piece of property at the beginning, something he bragged about constantly early in his career. But after he gained growing respectability following the Civil War, the story he so proudly boasted about changed. That's because when you break it down, as Reese says, he owned this woman, worked her 10 to 12 hours a day near the end of her life, worked her to death, and then exploited her after death. In a similar matter of, quote, rewriting his past, end quote, when he published his autobiography in 1855, many critics rightfully wrote about Barnum negatively. It was called trashy and offensive.
Without having read it, I can just imagine what all it's about. Again, sort of sanitizing, glossing over some of those unsavory bits to make him seem more palatable to a more genteel crowd.
And that's where I think, again, that idea of how he starts to approach issues or tell his story, right, changes, like it said, as he gains, to me, money and, again, hanging out with rich people. Like, suddenly he has to, I think, in some ways, sanitize himself, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what he believes.
Yeah, it's hard because sometimes people believe their own bullshit. If you tell
That's what's hard to
yourself
tell.
if you tell yourself a story long enough, you start to believe it. So you never know what it's like with him.
Yeah. And that way also reminds me of Trump, where you're like, is he really believe what he's spewing, or is he putting on a show?
It's hard unless you're in their brain. And obviously with P.T. Barnum, he's gone. Good riddance. So you can't ask him. But even then, you probably wouldn't get a straight answer.
No. But I thought it was funny. Twain supposedly loved his autobiography.
I feel like Twain would like that kind of kitsch, trashy thing. He'd love it. I think he'd love a trashy novel.
Being the full of himself, egotistical man that I had mentioned earlier, he obviously did not like that his autobiography was so critiqued. So he modified his autobiography many, many times, most likely in attempts getting to rewrite his past to please the public.
They didn't like this. Back to the drawing board.
Right. So while in the early days, it was clear that money and fame was a motivating factor for Barnum, later it seemed like it was more fame and notoriety that drove him.
Well, he had money at this point.
Right.
So
Right.
Easy. Once you have money, to be thinking more about those ambiguous things like fame and celebrity.
Exactly. For example, he placed his autobiography in the public domain in 1884 to allow for more access to it, even if it meant less profit.
Please read it. Somebody, please.
Yeah. You can read it and you can share it or whatever you want. Despite the fame and money, he did, of course, endure some personal tragedies or hardships. He did have one daughter who died in childhood. Again, sad, but not that uncommon for the time.
Yeah, with child mortality so high. Did they say what she died of?
No.
Disease.
The other hardship I had to side eye. Another one of his daughters was later left out of his will because of adultery.
Oh,
that's a hardship. And like another one of our favorite men in history, he never got the son that he so wanted.
Then is that in The Greatest Showman?
Also, probably not. Hugh Jackman being like, I just want a son. He actually later leaves a pretty substantial amount of money in his will to his grandson, with conditions, of course. So the condition was he had to use the name Barnum.
He wanted to pass on the name. Yeah.
Legacy was clearly on Barnum's mind. And when his wife Charity died at 64, Barnum also followed the Henry VIII path, and he married a 24-year-old.
Are we surprised? No. Do I love it? No. But did Charity and PT have a good relationship from what we can tell? I'm assuming Charity's the one in The Greatest Showman, played by Michelle Williams, I believe.
Yeah, because she's the one for most of his life. And I didn't hear that much. It seems like, again, he was gone a lot of the time, but they didn't mention too much about his marriage.
We could probably assume it's pretty typical for the time period, that paternalistic, I'm out here making the money and you stay at home with the kids.
Yeah. Again, the 4 daughters, where he's like, I didn't get my son, so yeah.
Poor baby.
I know.
We can't always get what we want.
No, I know. It's, as I started the episode with, it's funny because when we hear the name P.T. Barnum, we automatically associate him with the circus, but he didn't even become a circus showman until he was 60. Yeah. So when his museum burns down for the second time, he decides to quit on the museum business, and he puts his hat into the circus ring.
I do love 60. It's like, you two kids never give up. Your dreams never die.
Nope, not at all. So he starts P.T. Barnum's Grand Traveling Museum, Menagerie, Caravan, and Hippodrome in Delavan, Wisconsin in 1870.
Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah. Like the circuses we think of, it was a traveling circus. But to be clear, he did not invent the circus, but this was a traveling one. He did innovate some things that I'll talk about. When James Bailey, who was another big name in the circus world, was retiring, Bailey merged with PT, and PT really tried to create, quote, the greatest show on earth. And
there we go.
Yeah. One of his most famous attractions at the circus was Jumbo, a 6.5-ton elephant added to the circus in 1882 after being bought from the London Zoo.
Poor Jumbo. Justice for Jumbo. I know you weren't treated well, or I don't know, but I know.
I know.
In my heart of hearts, I know.
The Barnum and Bailey Circus was a massive success despite dealing with fires, train crashes, etc., train disasters, because they travel by train. To be clear, human curiosities were still part of this venture, so he has not gone away from that. He was really noted for his genius in advertising his circus. He was sometimes called the Shakespeare of advertising. He was put to use to continue to grow the popularity of the circus. So he really does change the circus from, I would say, lesser known thing into what we think of how many times the circus, and it still holds so much of that popular culture.
He didn't invent it, but he perfected it.
Used the train. So when he died in 1891, he fittingly had asked about box office receipts for the day. Again, not kind of check up on that money. And he died later that day. A year before, he had had a stroke. So he was in pretty bad health. So how was he written about in these first obituaries at the time? Like his contemporaries. Many applauded his American spirit, that rags to riches story, as well as his philanthropy. During his lifetime, he actually gave millions to Tufts University, among others.
That's good. We like philanthropy.
I don't want to go too much into detail, plus because I didn't read too much about it, but with his philanthropy, he did this thing that was called philanthropy for profit.
Oh, no.
I don't know what that exact profitable philanthropy, but
so it wasn't out of the goodness of his heart.
Basically, he's like, if I can improve people's lives and I can do it at a profit, that's good.
Fine, I take it back. Every time I think maybe something's good, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. The Times of London wrote, his name is a proverb already, and a proverb it will continue. Obviously, his legacy has become more complicated throughout the years and had that most recent makeover in the film. But I do want to end kind of his story on a quote from the late historian Borstein, who was quoted in the Smithsonian article. Contrary to popular belief, Barnum's great discovery was not how easy it was to deceive the public, but rather how much the public enjoyed being deceived. End quote.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can't blame him for profiting. You can blame him for profiting in some of those exploiting people, but as always, the public also deserves scrutiny too, because he wouldn't have that. He wouldn't be doing it if people didn't go to the show.
Right. This was a people who were hungry for entertainment, whether it was true or not. It was like, again, how many of the people believed the curiosities? It's hard to say, right? But it was something that obviously Barnum thought was justified.
I can't imagine there was much else to do back then. It's like, okay, I read some books. What else? You don't have, obviously, the endless entertainments that we have today.
For Barnum, as long as there was no harm, no foul, as long as customers felt like they got their money's worth, like, he was good.
He's prioritizing the customer, not the participants of the circus or the museum or whatever he was doing.
No, definitely not. It was about striking it rich.
The customer's not always right, P.T. Barnum.
I know. Comparing to the film, they mention, again, he's presented as this kind of smooth-talking Harold Hill type of a lovable con, which
Lovable, questionable.
Yeah.
Con, yes.
Yes, definitely
So,
con.
so one out of the two.
Like I said, it makes me laugh, but in a really horrific way of thinking about Hugh Jackman doing all these things in the film.
They're not presenting it as a straight biopic when it's a musical,
Yeah.
but there is still something gross about taking a man who exploited people and making it into family fun. Zendaya is there, Zac Efron. There are plenty of other stories we can tell that aren't P.T. Barnum's.
Right. Or just fictional. You know what I mean? It didn't have to be Barnum.
It didn't have to be him. It could be heavily influenced by Barnum, but not him. I do think that, not that, again, people aren't going to it and thinking that this
Right.
is,
That
like,
they're seeing a
great.
serious biopic.
Yeah, but it filters into the public consciousness, whether you like it or not.
Right. Yeah. And what it does, and I'm sure, again, PT would have loved that, is that it affects most people's version of what they think happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because most people are obviously not going to go out there and pick up a biography of P.T. Barnum, but they're going to at least pick up on, for a popular movie like that, pick up on the themes and be like, okay, yeah, again, not straight biopic, but like, oh, this is generally his story.
Mm-hmm. The rags to riches. We love those kinds of stories. Even without having seen it, I doubt that they talk about any exploitation of these people in there.
Mhm.
I'm sure it's just, this is great fun. We're all family here.
I think that's what it's more, is like this idea of them as family versus ownership.
And I don't think P.T. Barnum thought they were family.
No, I don't think so either.
He had no illusions. He owned them, even if he couldn't directly own them. He felt ownership of them.
Yes. So, judgment time.
Ooh, boy.
I know, this is a quick episode for us. And I think it's going to be a quick judgment. He's like a 90-10 for me. He's probably
Really? He's worse than a Nazi?
Well, I feel like, though, Von Braun contributed more to our American society with NASA. I know both Von Braun and P.T. Barnum, like, somebody would have probably filled that void because, again, P.T. Barnum didn't invent the circus, so
It's the
not
same
like,
thing, yeah, where he's not the only one, but we're not talking about anybody else. We're talking about him.
Right. But Von Braun, I feel, at least from what we can tell, really did push the space program. And obviously, again, that's like it's a 5% difference. It's hard to me to compare NASA to a museum of curiosities and a circus. I can't get past the way he started his career, especially knowing that, again, he was doing it like he thought he was owed fame and fortune. Like, he was entitled to that. And
well, and I get, in a way, he's using his ingenuity and his creativity, but again, nobody's there for P.T. Barnum. They're there for your quote unquote curiosities.
Yes.
So it's not like you haven't earned it. I'm sorry. You haven't earned
renting a person in the North, especially when slavery is outlawed, you're finding a loophole to rent her.
I hate that. I hate that so much.
Yeah. And again, working her 10 to 12 hours a day at the end of her life. And then
that's not enough. It's not enough for you. You need to earn the extra pennies to have people.
It's like that last kick.
Squeezing everything you can out of somebody.
Right. This idea of somebody being treated like that and then being cut up in front of a crowd for money and then being shocked that seems to be half the age that she was reported to be. And that's just, to me, so gross. It's like, again, putting on her the lie, like she was part of the con, as opposed to most likely her being told this is what you're going to do. And again, what are you going to do? If you're in the South, you're going to be a slave. Obviously, it seems like this old woman had no choice.
She wouldn't have been there if she had better options.
Just the exploitation of other racial groups and like the racist undertones to everything. It's just, even when he tries to shift it later in his life, again, I think it's just for political gain and for
He knows
more.
what's quote unquote, I don't want to say it's popular, but he's made his money off of the backs of these people. And again, now he wants to be more respectable.
Right. Because now he's going to politics and
It's a whole other, it's another con. He's putting on another costume.
I almost would, I don't want to say respect him more, but the fact that he goes from boasting about his start in show business to telling that story less and less and being more quiet about it. It reminds me in a way of that Von Braun piece where Von Braun, instead of directly addressing it and apologizing, the fact that he just
I just want it to go away.
Yep, put it in my back pocket. And earlier he was boasting. This is the start of my story.
In terms of my judgment, I'd probably be similar, maybe 85-15 if I want to be generous. When you're talking about these things, you can push back and say, well, is he much different than any other man at that time in terms of views?
Or be like, well, the people went to it and it was popular, so.
Which, again, I get, but you're the one who's setting it up. I know that's asking too much of a man in the 1800s probably to share the profits better, find ways that aren't as exploitive. That might be asking too much, but I think that's an excuse because it was getting out of fashion because there were people who recognized, for better or for worse, that this was not a form of entertainment that was necessarily
okay anymore.
Okay,
right?
yeah. So the fact, obviously, there is some thought towards that. And instead of using that ingenuity,
right, which he obviously had,
there's so much more that you could do with it, and instead you kind of take the lazy way out.
Yeah, with cons and playing up all these fake things like the Fiji mermaid, and
even
that sounds harmless, like the Fiji mermaid, but that's again not the problem. Is
I would feel better if it was just peddling and things like that. There's so many hoaxes during that time.
Right.
Like as people are discovering bones of the dinosaurs, people are creating hoaxes. So if it wasn't living people.
Are you saying that finding dinosaur bones is a hoax? You saying dinosaurs are fake?
No, but I'm saying that people, like, there's this fascination of, oh, what else can we find under the ground? What else is lurking there? If it was just peddling that kind of thing, obviously it's a con, but when it's living people, that's where it gets really hard to defend.
I don't think there's really anything else to say about that piece where it's harmful depictions of people and degrading and basically taking people who are already, I don't want to say on the outskirts of society, but on the margins of society.
Well, you look at the conjoined twins, there's not a lot of work for them. They might have difficulties doing normal manual labor. It's the same with, like I said, there's that History Hit After Dark podcast, and they talk about Joseph Merrick, who is the Elephant Man, and his difficulties in keeping a regular job. So he had to resort to being in quote unquote freak shows. It's not like this is their first choice.
No, right. Outcast. I'm an outcast of society, and there are people who are willing to exploit that and be like, well, what are you going to do? Basically, it's like, I can pay you what I want because it's either this or nothing.
Yeah. And again, I know he's not the only one, but you just hope and wish that people in those situations of power could do better.
I think especially as he gained money and such, it's like, do you really need to keep going? You know,
he got what he wanted out of it. He got the good side of the deal, and obviously a lot of times these people, their stories are tragic to the very end.
Mm-hmm. So that's P.T. Barnum.
Yeah. Every once in a while, it's good to just get somebody who's not complicated.
Yeah, not as complicated
Pretty
as the others.
easy.
But he's questionable, right? Especially because of how popular culture has treated him.
Oh, yeah. I don't think the average person, if you asked them about
No.
P.T. Barnum, would have a negative opinion of him. They might have I don't really know. I know something about the circus.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
especially nowadays, obviously, circuses are much different. So they might not be aware of some of those uglier parts of circuses and quote unquote freak shows back then.
Right. Definitely.
So
that was super fun.
Before we go, we're going to play a trailer for Dorky Podcast. It's another history podcast, as I mentioned at the top.
Yeah. Covers some really great topics.
Their latest episode is on The Princess in the Tower, which love.
Ooh, that's a good one, yeah.
I can't get enough, no matter how. It doesn't matter how many podcasts or books about it. I will read and listen to every single one.
Enjoy the trailer, and we will see you back next week.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Hello, my name is April, and I'm the host of the history podcast, Dorky. Dorky is 2 words, door and key. It's a play on the word dorky, which is really fitting because I'm a dork who loves to talk about history and random events and people from history. So come join me as I dive into these events and people. From Ötzi the Iceman to Studio 54, I cover it all in a way that's easy to consume. Get ready to hear a new and different perspective and gain a deeper understanding of the past while having some fun along the way. Welcome to Dorky. You can find and subscribe to Dorky anywhere you listen to podcasts, and Dorky is on all social medias as Dorky Pod, so be sure to check all of that out as well. Talk to you soon, friends.